Something has happened. I have sorry, something happened. Should probably.
Fèis Thatha dunne agus fáilte go siúl tír in Tatha Pàirt 3, mór an tang sonna tín colerain leine inach, agus lá féil Padraig sonagud. Sé próiste compárticus le Comann and Parant Obar Pheallaidh, Fèis Thatha, Taichlaiche, Fèis Pitlochry agus Corlaí Fiarst is Kinross, a cóiricha dúchas Gaelic a siadach fiarst mar farste Fèis Thatha. Has sin tangal cúideach san Moireach vo SSE agus Bors na Gaelic. Good evening everyone and welcome to Exploring the Fèis Gaelic Landscape Part 3. Many thanks for joining us online this evening and happy St. Patrick's Day to you. The Fèis Gaelic Memoir is a collaborative project in partnership with Comann and Parant Obar Pheallaidh, Fèis Thatha, Pitlochry Festival Theatre and Perth and Kinross Council. The project will celebrate Perthshire's Gaelic heritage as part of Shades of the Tay. We're also grateful for funding from SSE and Bord na Gaelic for making this project happen. San session webinar seo, bí Iain Moireach, útar an leor Léa Iain tíre gar torst turas a ransachuig na tíre Tatha agus a dúchas Gaelic fo Glau na Gaelic gu Glen Shee. In this webinar session, John Murray, author of Reading the Gaelic Landscape, will take us on a journey exploring the land of the Tay and its Gaelic heritage, from Glengarry to Glen Shee.
It's great to have you all with us this evening, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Aileen, for that brilliant introduction as well. Just to say, John will do his talk, and then there will be time for questions later. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function, which is just at the bottom of the screen. You can ask a question at any stage during the session, and we will be able to see that and respond to that at the end of John's talk. Without further ado, I will hand over to John Murray. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Aileen, for the introductions. Fescama, agus falcha a charchen, agus tapalat sonaching anoch. As Aileen said, we are going to travel from Glengarrig or Glengarry to Glenshee or Glenshee tonight. And I have, oops, something is happening. Excuse me while I just, right. Okay, so this is the map of the route we will take tonight from Glengarrig to Glenshee. And
John, sorry to interrupt, I'm just going to stop you. Oh, we can now see
good.
The map. Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it wasn't behaving in the normal way. So from Glengarry, we're going up to Drumochta or Druin Uchka, the top ridge, and back down the valley of the Garry River and taking a side valley up Stronfatric, very suitably on St. Patrick's Day, and then heading past Brua, through Blerathel, around the back of Bainaglaw, and coming to Benvrechi, then across to Glenshee, and up to the Cairnwell, and back down Glenshee via Loch Beanie. So quite a complicated journey. So I did a word map, and these are the kind of things we'll talk about, which are all involved in the stories, the songs, and the place names I'll mention. So Jalaf Naducha, Eneman, Moireach, Fiamma, Ahol, Fier, Kernach, Glounton, Biaunton, Lochen, Clach, Cregan, Corria, Clachen, Búchach, Doran, Kjerken, Maha, a snake. I did this in English as well, and I realized doing this that Gaelic words are much longer than English ones. So we will be in the territory of the Murrays of Athol, and we're talking a lot about annals this time. Last time it was all about witches and fairies. They're still here, but not as much. And we'll be talking about the Fianna in Glenshee in particular. Okay, but starting Glengarry, I'm going to play a wee bit of a song we played last time, it's Bohan Ari and Brai Ranach, the shieling hut of the Braes of Ranach. And I'm playing this because this is where the Ranach people went for their summer sheelings, those living on the Slias Mean, the soft side. But we have a story connected with the sheeling as well. So you can see in the first verse, This idea of honey and kisses will come to references to honey as well in other contexts. But the story that I want to tell you occurs near Alt Corria Essan, which is the stream of the Corrie of the Little Waterfall. And it concerns a young boy called Iain, who went with the fairies. There was a drought in the summer when they were at the sheelings, and the cattle were growing thin and weak. Iain went to find his cattle up the hill, but it was a very hot day, and he lay down and for a rest on a low green mound. And there he heard tiny voices singing in a chorus, and the chorus was growing louder and louder and louder. And he realized each blade of grass had a little voice, and all the blades of grass were singing together in chorus. And he knew he was with the fairies. And as the song went on, the grass grew thicker and richer and more succulent until it was up to the eyes of the cattle. And so when he brought his herd down, he had lots of milk, and a lot of butter and cheese could be made. when I forgot the punchline, didn't I? He joined in after a while. Grow for everyone who's true. And the fairies for once didn't object to somebody singing their song. And so he got away with it this time. So when he came down, he had lots of milk. But the other people tried to find the place and tried to find the sweet green grass, but couldn't, because it was only Iain who was with the fairies. Just at the top of that slide, you'll see the boar of Badenoch and the sow of Athelmart. We'll come on to them in a while. Right, so we're going up to Droim Uachge, or Dramochta, as it is on the road signs, but correctly spelt on the railway sign. So it means the top ridge, the uppermost ridge, and it is indeed the watershed between the Tay catchment and the Spey catchment. So you can see where Alt Coria Essen is. There's a really odd one just between the boar and the sow, and it's the Rock of the Apples. And this must be an Ulas Asture, to quote Runrig. It must be the highest apple, if indeed the place name is correct. It seems unlikely an apple tree would be growing at such an altitude, though. The other place the Ranach people would go for shillings, as you can see by looking at the bottom right of the screen, is Loch Chon, Loch of Dogs. But there's also a really unpleasant story there concerning our Wars of Independence hero who fought with Bruce against the MacDougals, Donnacha Rower. Loch Chon was one of his wife's favourite places, and but Donnacha grew tired of his wife, perhaps because they couldn't produce an heir together. And so he determined to get rid of her. And he deceived her in going up to her favourite place, rode over to the island and walled her up in a subterranean cave, and then proceeded to woo the daughter of the Laird of Glentilt. And when asked where his wife had gone, he would say, "I have no wife above ground." So a really unpleasant side to our Wars of Independence hero, Donnacha Rower. Right, now let's talk about the boar and the sow. The boar is shown as Antorc Vachanoch, but the sow on the map is shown as Mialnan Doherchon. It's not shown as a Chrawn Ahel, which is really puzzling, the sow of Athel in Gaelic. Mialnan Doherchon means the round hill of the otters, which is really peculiar. But it conforms to this idea of Gaelic naming patterns, often using pairs of opposites. So sometimes you'll get the Queen's Hillock and the King's Hillock, for example. And I've been puzzled by this as I've driven up the A9 many times and looked at these hills. And it wasn't until I looked at them on this oblique aerial that I realized there was quite a difference in shape, and you could ascribe sort of stereotypical masculine features to the boar, because it's much more angular and rough looking and steep looking than the sow, which is softer and more rounded. So that was an interesting discovery. But we'll just do a bit of, I don't know whether you can see the full screen okay, but I thought it'd be useful to look at some roots of words, frey of Achluch, etymology in other words. So Owl means New Ireland. It's a combination of A and Falla. So it must relate to settlement of a lot of Scots coming across to what was once Pictish territory. Bachanoch is a combination of Bacha, meaning drowned, and Uch, so it's the drowned land. And if you are driving down from Dramochta past Newtonmore onto Kinross, where the Speys and flood, you'll see the land is quite extensively drowned. And now we can see the origin of that word for otter. Docha plus ku gives you Docha Chon, so it's a stream dog, if you like. there's also another name for otter, which again is water dog, Matachushka, and there's a place name on Skye, which I've dug out, which shows you it was used in Skye. But nowadays we'd say Doharan for otter. Right, now, so appropriately for St. Patrick's Day, we are in Srawn Patrick, the Patrick's promontory. This was bought by the Athol family in 1875 and converted from a sheep run to a deer forest. And the song you see on the right, this is just 2 verses from quite a long song, must date from when before it was a sheep run, because it talks about wildlife, it talks about the quality of the farmland, and it talks about people living and courting there. And it's a great song collected by Lady Evelyn Stewart Murray, who we'll hear a lot about later, 4 years before she did the bulk of her collecting. And unfortunately, she hadn't got a system yet, clearly, because she doesn't record who she got it from, which is a bit irritating, because it's a really beautiful song. I'll just read the 2 first verses so you get an idea of its sound and the rhyme scheme. Bí an brú dhearach ann san smeorach, spí an úsec gál ceolgaibh, spí iol bhón an spocan, sí cáni san dún. Nan torach tú do lámh go, stíon gúrach do Srawn Patrick, vig imach ní good tallias nach ariav me rún. So it's that 4th line is the rhyming one, and it goes all the way consistently through the song with that. The 2nd and 3rd songs talk about the quality of the crops you could grow there and the amount of milk you could produce. So it must have been this sort of Donachaban situation he describes in his Moireach Bein Doran of nature and agriculture and people living in harmony. So Spáiach an Tatha Srawn Patrick, bí Cork Siorna Fasown, bí Míl Barn Yoran, Snionachin Cho Glue, Mi Gira Grishna Bountain, Starring Stein Roglaunton, Co Hacha Oranach Bountuk, Sound Hundi Room Saku. So you often get this in these upland shieling type areas where love affairs don't quite work out as they had been hoped to work out. And this was given to Evelyn in 1891 by Mrs. Anne Stewart from Balnaheglashire, Kirkton of Lude. She's the lady on the left. So we'll see where she lives in due course. Okay, now we're going down the valley of the Gari and passing Brewer, and I flagged this up because we have a lot of examples of this strange word, and you'll see them all over Perthshire, Elrig, and Dwelly defines this as a place or a structure in which deer in days gone by would be herded and shot with bows and arrows. So we can see the deer trap of birches, the deer trap of the lamb farmship, and the deer trap of the king. Now, at the bottom right, you'll see Balnan Stuartich, or Balnan Stuartach rather. This is the township of the Stuarts, and before the Murrays married into the Stuart Earls of Athol, it was Stuart territory. And in 1564, Mary Queen of Scots went on a trip to visit her cousin, who was the Earl of Athol at that time, and they went hunting. And you'll see that Elrig word at the bottom there, Miaul na Helrig, round hill of the deer trap. And the hunt was held in Loch Lochy, or Glown Lochy. It's tautologically now represented as Loch Loch, but Lochy is a different word meaning glossy black, and it probably relates to the deepness and blackness of that glen. But it's an ideal place to round up deer for the slaughter, and it was a slaughter, and it got out of control, and a lot of people, herdspeople, were killed in the stampeding deer. Not Mary Queen of Scots, as she was safe on her hillock, Town na Ban Rí. not on the map, but it's known to be roughly in that area. So Arachit Vine is a good name because it literally means silver mountain, and you can see from its appearance it is indeed a silver mountain with all that scree on it. Right, and here we have the Athol family in 1886, and I've ringed at Lady Evelyn. So this is before she really started collection, but all the family, apart from Louisa Moncrief, the mother, were Gaelic speakers. Louisa had no time for Gaelic. Evelyn amassed a huge vocabulary of Gaelic books. She'd experienced 2 bouts of illness, and it's thought to have led to obsessive characteristics in her behaviour. And Gaelic was one of the areas she became obsessed with, going out in all weathers, collecting stories, songs, and poetry, staying up all night, not eating, making records of all her notes formally. And she collected this song. So it's an interesting praise song for the family, and shows praise poetry for the clan chief was not dead in the late 19th century. It's not a particularly good composition. Van the Yek, Juk Jorsa, Havach le Corn Archer, Gove na Ben Foster, and Oig and Tuke Grag, Han True Vach Gefase, Ho Aling Rishan Ros, Han Ferju Navaricus, Sadavraha Namora. So the reason they were Gaelic speakers was they were brought up by servants, nursery maids, who were all Gaelic speakers from the estate. But the family had another side, as indicated by this cartoon of the Duke from Vanity Fair in 1879. They kept a house in Eaton Square in Belgravia. And from there, they would attend the various London Society events, including the various Debs balls, where it was hoped the 3 daughters would meet a duke. Evelyn wasn't interested in this world, much to the annoyance of her mother. She really hated it and wanted to get back to Blair Athol to carry on with her work. And the song continues with a verse about the 3 ladies who never married dukes. Ha 3 oyen skiavach kiatach le jovius, and an injas moon ha gulenach gadare, serving loom and feiking, marachig eich state, sari gachjen truer, duch gavi fein. So here's Evelyn, aged 21. This was after her first bout of illness, which was thought to be diphtheria, after her hair was cut off. A second bout followed in about 1890, and it was thought to be typhoid coming from the castle drains. So this is what did for Prince Albert in Buckingham Palace as well, allegedly. So not always a life of privilege living in these old castles. Right, and this is the volume she collected. A huge amount of stories collected in over 10 months. And you'll see the preponderance of stories about the supernatural, fairies, brownies, and witches. Great piece of work by Sylvia Robertson and Tony Dilworth, collecting all valuable chapters on Perthshire Gaelic, the people Evelyn spoke to, the vocabulary, the place names. Fantastic book. And Evelyn tragically died. She'd been sent abroad, exiled by her mother, because she was bringing disgrace on the family, according to her mother, by rejecting her background. And there had been records of madness in both families, the Moncriefs and the Murrays. They didn't want scandal occurring again, so she was sent away and didn't come back until World War II broke out. But finally, she was buried at Chirani House, where one of her sisters lived. And as she was laid, as the coffin was laid in the grave, a swan alighted on the loch, and people thought this was her soul alighting on the loch. So the storytellers will see examples of we've already heard from Anne Stewart from Kirkton of Lude, but we'll hear from Duncan McIntosh, John Reid, and Peter Scott, ordinary estate workers who were born in the first half of the 19th century. Okay, and we're looking at a closer shot of Glentilch or Glentilt and Glan Fúndohar or Glenfender, Glen of the White Stream or Holy Stream. And you can see Bainaglaw up there and Lochy as well. And Town na Guya, which was the home of John Reid, Windy Hillock, one of the informants, and the Kirk of Lodge or Lude, which may account for Glan Fúnda being a holy stream. Okay, the first story is about a mind map of a poacher called Lonavai, who stayed at the top of Glen Shee. And this is supposedly the most famous song in Athol. Chimi bain rá na neik, bain veik serakit vain, bain vúrich dav na croichke, salt niet Iain rihöv, chimi schliganich agus srom nam broch, rui na nírich san dagún, chimi kreke chrochi, chruai, sa chonlach voor a chŵ, chimi glasleid fat, skarsach fat a haal, chimi bain jorna húr, oert huas for chriach and var. So this is interesting. He actually in Gaelic means will see or can see. So he's describing a sort of continuous future or a continuous ability to see. So this is his mind map. You can't actually see all these places at the one time unless have a drone. So this is very much in Lonavai or Machgil Lonavai's mind. As you can see from this map, stretching from the Braes of Mar, as he said, right to the top of Glen Shee. It's quite an extensive sort of Dialaf na Dúcha, which is literally picture of the land, meaning map in Gaelic. He has, and I don't think we conceive of landscape this way now. We're, despite our advanced technology, I think we conceive of things at ground level more. So these guys had a almost like 3D aerial perspective of landscape. Okay, the second story is one from Iain Rodge or John Reid from Town na Guya, and it concerns fairies who stayed on the hill of Dalmeen on the left. So it's Naioch Ma Hian Mial Talmain. So what happened here was as follows. Va Urlach and Cloudlodge who Alna Nolika, Vaat all Bekanushka, Behe agus Das yet Gumak Creel agus Vata Torsch Koor, a Hulafair da Horsnach, he in Gukuch Nolika. And one man picked up a skull and Hamlet style also invited it to get a Christmas dram round at his place, an invitation the skull took up in the form of a man. And he arrived at the house and the lady of the house put down food for him, got him his dram, and he ate everything in the house and everything which she got from her neighbour's house as well, and all the cakes she baked from the scrapings of her kneading trough. And he went away, leaving an invitation from the man of the house to come round to see the skull as he was, to get a New Year dram. The man of the house never took that up, but one day he was up on Mial Dal Mine and he heard sweet singing coming from a cave, and he stopped to listen, and he was enchanted by this beautiful music coming from the cave. Then he saw a man passing him by who addressed him in Gaelic and said, "Why have you been away so long?" And the man of the house said, "I haven't been any time at all. not at all. And it was only when he got home that he realized that the baby he'd left when he went up the hill of Dalmine and heard the singing from the fairy mound, the baby he'd left was now a toddler. He'd been away over a year. So this is quite a common thing, people being so enchanted by fairy music coming from a hillock that they lose track of all time. The next story concerns harps, and the Robertsons, both of Lodge or Lud and Straloch in Strathdal, were enthusiasts for the clarsach, as a harp is in Gaelic. And these two examples were indeed owned at one time by the Robertsons of Lodge. And in the 18th century, if you were a laird, a Highland laird in your castle, you had to have a piper, you had to have a poet who was often a genealogist as well, and you had to have a clarsa, a player of the clarsach. And this is Moireach Nian Lachain, writing about the MacLean of Duart at that time. So sawn nur cachil and greenye, a va tav na keen hini, a va ervel rin shirach, guran chimachel and chenya, yeefje barstjach nam fili, sku nan klarsich and beenya. So essential if you wanted to entertain your clansfolk with music from your culture. There was a clarsa who was on his way between Lodge and Straloch, and he rested, we don't know exactly where, I suspect it was about the watershed, the highest point on his journey, where he took his breath. He rested at Clach a Clarsa, the stone of the harper. So probably around about where that figure between 97 and 98 is on the map, just below Miaul na Helric, which we talked about earlier, and just to the right of Coria na Servia. So Servia means a den, usually a wolf's den, and this story involves wolves. So it must date from the 17th century at the latest, I would have thought. So here we have a harper encountering a pack of wolves on his journey from Lodge to Straloch. Quite a rough country, this. So, Chwynike drof da Vatigali, chi na Conyaf, gove ekel môr, charo isek a kit janige, smuniche clwych a clarsich, halting am gavach na beiging ekelas, hui a chlachsho, agus hosiche a clarsach, clwych, ach chadagov na beiging ekel savi. Indeed, they approached him, and the leader of the pack came right up to him and stretched out its paw. And the clarsa saw that there was a thorn in the paw, and he thought, I wonder what I'll do. Perhaps the wolf wants me to remove it, since it offered me its paw in such a way. So he removed the thorn, at which the leader went back to the pack, and the pack went off and left him in peace and unharmed. And he continued, no doubt quite shaken, on his way to Straloch. Many years later, he was at a fair at Carmichael, which would be Eglish vehicle in Gaelic, and a man approached him, a stranger, and he asked the clarsa, don't you recognize me? And the clarsa said, no, not at all. And the man stretched out his hand to him, palm upwards, and said, you took a thorn out of my paw. The thorn was put there by my stepmother, who was a witch, and she turned me into a wolf. And had you not removed that thorn from my palm, I would be a wolf to this day. So this is quite a a happy story. Right, now we are coming around the back of Bainavrechi, the mountain of the speckled place. This is the front, actually. And we're going to hear another story. But first of all, I'd like to talk about mapping. So there's lots of discrepancies in the mapped record in this part of Perthshire and Glen's Shee, as we'll see. At the bottom of the picture, you'll see another Elrig there. So deer hunting all over the place. But you'll see, and also on the extreme right, you'll see parts of the ferry, Bealach and Tia. So ferries here as well. We'll hear more about them later. This is the Ordnance Survey first edition, 1867 to 9, 6 inch to the mile. So Bealach na Sheriff is the pass of the sour place. Sheriff is sour in Gaelic. If you want to say you're really tired, you say, I'm Shach Sheriff Ski. I'm seven bitter tired, 7 times bitterly tired. So, but I think the sheriff here probably refers to plants, maybe something like sorrel. And then Pollock na Tonya is the little pool of the bum or fundament, which is really, really odd. So these two names change, as we'll see on the current map. So Bealach na Shervik becomes Bealach na Sherman, the pass of the sermon. I don't know whether there was blanket preaching or outside preaching there. When I can access a library and get the statistical account for the area, I'll look into it. So Pollock na Tonya becomes Paul Gunton, which means the puddle without a bottom, which is really, really odd. I've been in correspondence with Colin Liddell about Merlin, and he was questioning Watson's definition of Merlin or Moulin as being a bald, rocky brow of a hill, saying, well, there isn't one there. And he directed me to Black Castle, Castell Du. And the full name in days gone by was Castell Du Verlin, which would mean the Black Castle of the Gentle Pool, or the Soft Pool, perhaps. And Amy tells me today this whole area is indeed very soft and boggy after any rainfall. So I suspect this origin of Merlin from Castell Du Verlin is probably correct, and Watson is indeed wrong. So thanks for that, Colin. And it's not without precedent either. Muthel, south of Crieff, is Merle in Gaelic, which would mean the soft place. And it must be an old name because the TH of Mer, which is silent today, is voiced in Murthel or Muthel. Right, the first story concerns a dairymaid who stayed at Balnakeely or Ballyanakelia, which is the township of the church. And the second one I'll tell you is about ferries in Knockbarry or Crochbarry. Okay, so there was a woman who was a milkmaid who was thought to be a witch, and she kept cattle, and she always liked to be around when her cattle were in calf at Toragorst, somewhere on the flanks of Bainavrechi, not on the map anymore. And her cattle did extremely well up there for milk, rather like Iain in Clownagari, who went with the fairies. This woman with supernatural powers was not short of milk, butter, and cheese, even though her colleagues were. And she was so fond of the place, she wrote this little verse, Tor Mochria, or composed it rather, Tor Mochria, Tor Mograi, Tor Meving, Tor Gorst. Maar H Moireach na náte fó na gréine, Liturv na grain, do Chockerel. So this is where she wanted to be buried. But this was not really orthodox. So her grave was dug in the graveyard at Moorlinia, as we now know it. But the local people were so scared of affronting her that they carried her up the hill to Torragorst and interred her there. So the Torragorst is mentioned as a shieling relating to Bal Edmund in the 18th century. So it does definitely exist, if we can find it. Right, the next story is another one concerning fairies stopping time. So two lads went up the hill, and at Croch Barry again they heard music, but this time it was pipe music. And again, they were enchanted and stopped to listen to this music and couldn't get away. So da chayed gachi, charo dunya riaiking, da na bainachaiv, van chim chumor stai, charo ni riaiking, da hanek yed gachi, ach liarichen, then taien, faran ra na karstenach. So this is really quite sad, because they'd been away so long. By the time they got back, their houses and their families had been, their houses were ruined and their families had been cleared. So this is quite common. But again, fairies stopping, having the power to stop time for people. Okay, now we are crossing to Strathdal, and Straloch we've already heard about. There's some really odd place names in this area, really odd place names. At the bottom you'll see Lav Yerrick, Red Hand. We'll come across another Red Hand in Glenshee or Glenshee later on. We've got Bla Valak to the left of it, which literally means warm bag. A bag can be a lump or a bag-shaped corrie. So it must be a warm, sheltered place facing south. We have Sliabh Buya or Sliabh Buya. Sliabh is very common in Ireland for a mountain, but in Perthshire it means a moor. In Colin, Tyree and Iona it'll mean sort of rough grazing. So it doesn't mean a mountain in Scottish Gaelic. And at the top of the slide you'll see Craig na Cúneacha, which is rock with a milking pail. Cúneachas are really common in this part of Perthshire and attests to all this milk production and butter production. Enachdu is Ernachdu. Ernach can mean a plateau or a moor as well as a ridge. Strathdal, allegedly, is supposed to be the strath of the high blood. A lot of toponymists don't think that's correct, but certainly some think it commemorates a Pictish noble warrior of high blood who defeated the Vikings in this place and was buried under this mound near Unachdu. But other people say Strathdal really is Sra Mór na Muich Gabrichke, much less romantically, the big valley of the spotted pig. So take your pick. Sra Mór na Muich Gabrichke is not mapped. Right. And I've got a lot of stories from this book, collected from the Mackenzies, by Anthony Mackenzie, whose family's been in the Glen for a long time. But again, we have mapping inconsistencies between the first edition of Ordnance Survey and the current edition. And this one's quite important because Glenshee must get its name from Corriahi, the corrie of fairies. And yet on the first edition, it's mapped as the corrie of the hinds, Corrie nan Eilich. This maybe isn't so odd since deer and hinds were fairy cattle. But it's unfortunate the name books where the Ordnance Survey recorded their work aren't with us anymore. having been destroyed in the war. So we can't find out which of these is correct. But anyway, this is actually where Glan She begins in Codia He. When you're driving through, you think it goes up Glan Bake up to the Cairnwell, but it doesn't. It actually stops and goes off to the right where Glan Tachnach begins, the Pleasant Glen. And at the bottom of the lower slide, you'll see another reference to a milking pail, Croch na Cúneacha. The most famous Cúneach is Quinag in Sutherland. It should be a Cúneach. Okay, now a close-up of where we are. Glan Tachnach, the Pleasant Glen. We'll not often see glens, Gaelic place names being given some kind of aesthetic quality. Loch Boyach in Coll is another one. Loch Allen in Morven is another one. Beautiful loch, and both beautiful lochs, in fact. So looking up Glan Tachnach, we see a reference to a tantalizing reference to a cairn of the Clarsach. I wonder if it's connected with our story of the Clarson. But again, we're seeing more mapping inconsistencies. Baton Lawn, the place on the meadow, and the current map is Baton Louis, place of the calf on the first edition. In this case, I think Baton Louis is much more likely. Naming a hill after a meadow doesn't really make sense to me. And we see some corruptions of Gaelic word, Cams, Tomb, and Kero, which we'll come to later, as we're approaching the divide between where Gaelic was spoken at the time of name collection and where Scots was coming in. You're getting a lot of these corruptions of Gaelic words. Right, now let's look at some really much older maps, and we can see Cams is mapped as Camus by William Roy, which relates to the Gaelic word Camas, meaning a curve in a river or a curved bay. And you can see the curve in the river there. That curve's gone now. It's been straightened out. And you can see Tomb, as it's mapped now, is Taum, it's just a hillock. Kero is still Kero, but in Gaelic it's Kerif, just meaning a quarter. Okay, so Carn Wallach we'll have a look at. Carn Wallach actually relates to or Carn Wallach, as what Roy has, it relates to the Gaelic pronunciation, although now we have Cairnwell as it's mapped. Loch Shessatur, as it's mapped by Robert Gordon at the bottom of his map, we'll come to later. So this is all very puzzling stuff. Look how Roy does his landform, by the way, in comparison to Gordon. So Roy is rather more accurate than Gordon. Right, so we're going up Glown Bake, the little glen, to the Cairnwell, and you can see, and I think Carnavallach relates to that bag-shaped corrie you can see directly under the white name title I put on. Okay, so this area, Clownshee, Strathardle, they were all subject in the 16th, 17th century to Caterans or Kehernich coming from Bachanoch and Loch Aber and trying to steal cattle from the fertile or then fertile lands of Glenshee, Glen Isla and Strathardle. And one such story concerns a man called Cam Rua, who was an ugly man, only 5 foot tall, had one eye, but he was an incredible shot with a bow and arrow. But he was a man of few words, and he was instrumental in defeating a band of Caterans who were making off with cattle from Glenshee and Glen Isla, and he defeated them in Mial, in that corrie below Mial Ower, the sort of light brown coloured round hill. And it was quite a contest and Cam was wounded, as we shall see. And this is, being a man of few words, this is what he said when somebody pointed out, Achaim Rua, ha sayat nan horn. And he replies, Ha fi sakum hene shin. So, a man of few words, but he makes it back home to his steading in Glaun Tachnach, the pleasant glen, where his wife has an almighty struggle extracting the arrow from his buttock. Okay, now another famous defender of the glen was Moireach Mór, who was a famous swordsman, and he again was instrumental as in sending hordes of Cateran from Bachanach and Lochaba packing with his sword. And they were so delighted on his death, they composed this little song. Sciel is Jo Sciel, Bianichtja Oya Múria, Chavor Macomi and Brian a Machera, get a Bovuvor is Lachere. So they were quite pleased he was gone. But there is one story of Moireach Mór relating to this stone, which should be Clach Ucholich, the stone of the Cockerel, not Clach na Colliach as it's currently mapped, which would mean a cockerel would have to be feminine, which it clearly isn't. So the Stuart Earls of Murray's, the Stuart Earls of Athol's rent collectors were collecting kine or rent in kind from people in Glenshee, and they overstepped their jurisdiction and removed more from a helpless old lady in the glen than they should have done, and then removed all her chickens in a basket when they were only entitled to one as part of their payment in kind. And she told Moireach Mór, or Big McThomas, and he was so furious he caught up with the rent collectors and challenged them, but they mocked him, whereupon he drew his sword and killed the leader, and the rest realized who he was and his skill as a swordsman and fled, leaving their basket of cockerels behind. And Moireach Mór sliced the top off, and whereupon the cockerel flew to the top of the stone and crowed in victory, and hence the name of the rock, which is now the gathering point of Clan McComish, the Thompsons. So this is 1676, so we can date this. What's interesting, if we look at the jeering of the Caterans on Moireach's death, is they must still be Catholics, seeking the blessing of the Virgin Mary, and also they're referring to Moireach as coming from Brian a Machera, the braes of the lowlands. So this is the way they're seeing Glenshee, right on the edge of the lowlands. They're seeing Glenshee as not a Highland glen from their perspective, but the slopes of the lowlands. Quite interesting perspective, that. Right, but I've told this many times. The most famous tale is about Bain Gulpen, and it's a tale of the Fianna, and I shall skip through it in very abbreviated form because you've heard it all before, and it concerns Finn and his wife Grania, daughter of Cormac MacAirt, High King of all Ireland from Tara, and Dermot's best pal and chief warrior of Finn, who's fallen in love with Grania. Finn's not well pleased with this. He wants to damage Dermot, so he sends him on a hunt for a legendary boar that inhabits the Snouty Mountain, a great big symbol of the boar, and whose lair is at Lebby and Turk, the bed of the boar on the side of Bain Gulpen. Dermot's successful, brings back boar. Finn says, measure it out to make sure you got the right one. Dermot does. Finn says, do it the other way around. Finn does it the other way around, from tail to snout, gets pricked by a bristle, gets blood poisoning, falls into a spasm, is at death's door. Finn says, "What's your dying wish?" Dermot says, "A cup from your magic hands." Finn goes to this loch and Turk, Loch of the Boar, comes back with the water, spills most of it because he's hesitating. He's still jealous of Dermot, and by which time Dermot is dead. And he's buried at a mound just down the glen, together with Grania, who dies of sadness, and his 6 white greyhounds. So there you go. And this is probably the most famous tale of the Fianna, and it's told in Ireland. And we think Bain Bullaban is a corruption of Bain Hullaban in Sligo or Sligach. That's where we get Schligachan in Skye from as well. Just means a shelly place. Bain Gullapan, just on the edge of the lowlands, and Bain Hullapan, just north of Aviemore. And they're all sort of snouty shapes, and all providing a backdrop for a stage set for this telling the story of Dermot's struggle with the mythical enormous boar, which was his downfall, even in its demise. So, but we know it was told in Glen Shee and perhaps originated there, because this was composed by Alan Mac Ruairi, Alan, son of Rory, in 1500. So this is really old Gaelic. Glawn Shee and Glawn Shore am Herv and Bean Fui Iain is Lawn, Minnick Reachis and Ain, Trashaw and Jay a Con. And Glawn Shore Fa Vine Glub and Gurum a Salcha Tulaka Fa Grain, Nyorv Anya Vachrocha Gutjerik and Jay Shellock or Iain na Bain. Eist je beek, ma eilief le, a goedjechtje geuf sjovuim. Vijn glopen, se Iain viel, is maar ui goenje skiel true. So this is interesting. Mach ui goenje is how the Campbells style themselves. So Dermot must have had children who went on to found Clan Campbell. So despite his demise, he went on to father a highly successful clan, depending on how you look at it. Okay, so moving further down Glen Shee, we find yet more weird things going on the map. Remember Loch Shesseter? On the current map, it's become Loch Beanie. On the first edition, it's Loch Shechanich. On James Thompson, it's Loch Shechanich. We don't really know what either Loch Beanie or it should actually be Loch Hechanich, mean. And we think Loch Beanie was what it was called by the folk in Glen Shee, and Loch Hechanich by the folk in Glen Isla. So that's one. Clach na Collich is mapped incorrectly, Clach na Collich on the current map. But we've got a Lav Jeric here, shown in its correct location on the current map and indeed on the Ordnance Survey first edition. But top right on James Thompson's map, it's swapped places with Meow Eskinen, as it is now, and become Law Craig. Which is interesting, because law would how you say law in Love in today's Gaelic, in Perthshire Gaelic. You wouldn't pronounce that MH in Perthshire Gaelic, it would be law. So you can see how non-Gaelic speaking map makers would mistake lav, as we now say it, for law. But that doesn't forgive them swapping its place with Meow Eskinen, which they mapped actually pretty correctly as Meownan Eskich. So, all a bit odd. Right, but more of this area in a little bit. So we'll tell one tale about another stone, This is Clach na Narach. I told you there was a snake coming. The stone of the snake, not mapped, somewhere to the north of Loch Beanie or Loch Hechernich. There's a Glaun Carnach, which means a stony glen. There was a witch who lived and kept her herd of cows somewhere to the north of Loch Beanie. Craig and Cassia, on the right of the picture, refers to cheese, so we know there's reference to dairy farming there, hard as it is to believe today. Anyway, the Laird of Glenshee, who lived sometime on that wee island in Loch Beanie, thought that the witch had put a spell on his child and caused it to die. And he was so furious, he pursued her and tracked her down at what we now know as Clach na Narach, so called because she shape-shifted herself into a snake and disappeared into a snake-shaped hole in the loch. And the laird was so furious, he struck it. And if you can find this rock, unlike me, you'll see the snake-shaped hole and the claymore marks made by the laird on its surface. So I'm going to have another look next year once we're out of lockdown. So you can see by the other place names what's happening to place names here. We get Lecher, meaning slope, anglicised as letter, and we get Craig and Loch Hill, which is a bit of a tautology, and Glaun becomes Glen. So we're right on the edge of where Gaelic's was spoken by those who gave the map names and Scots speakers. Okay, now we're back to Láv Jeric, which should be Láv Jeric because it's feminine, and Mial Escanan. And I just want to talk a wee bit about Clachavoch. So Clachavoch comes from a word which you'll know, mod, which is now a competition for poetry, song, clarsach playing, pipe playing, held annually by the Gaels and in Comann Gaelch. But in those days, and you get a lot of Clachavoch, it was a seat, a place where justice was dispensed by the lairds, who then had the right of meting out punishment for miscreants at places called Clachavoch. So quite an interesting spot that, and the laird presumably lived at the castle of Dal na Gloire, presumably. Okay, so the next story I want to tell relates to this 9 strong we set out into a wood. Quite mysterious, isn't it? But it occurs and it refers to Láv Jeric. There's nothing red-handed about this hill at all. It's just a round hill, like so many others. It's not red, it's not hand-shaped, so there's something else behind it, as we'll find out. And the other hill, which relates to the story, is Craig Nambratichen. It should really be Craig Nambratach, which means Rock of the Banners. All very mysterious, nothing resembling a flag on this hill at all. So it relates to a cultural concept. Right at the top, you'll see Craig Fèis Thatha. That's sideways on the map, which means Rock of the Boggy Stream of the Heads. Quite an ominous name. Fèis means a vein, literally, but can refer to a boggy stream. Fèis Thatha. You'll often get Topan and Cian in the Highlands as well, relating to rather bloody acts, and this is no exception. Okay, let's hear about 9 strong we set out into a wood. So we're looking at Mial Escanan in the left-hand slide from what's now mapped as Cockerel, which means the sharp pass. I think it's probably Cuang Larrick, as it has been mapped earlier. the narrow pass. As you can see, it's quite narrow. And I think Meal Escanan is the eel-shaped hill. And you can see the head of an eel there. You can see the sinuous, long fin of an eel running the whole length of its body. And top right, you can see Láv Yerrick, again, a round hill covered in heather. We're looking from the black shieling. Rui is Perthshire Gaelic for Ari, meaning shieling, and we're looking to Craignam Bratich. And here we have 9 of us on one of Perth and Kinross Gaelic walks heading up the hill. Right, the story is really weird, and it's another tale of the Fianna when Dermot was still alive, because he's mentioned. But Fiann and his men, the Fianna, go in search of a magic stick with which to train a pup, no doubt a pup who would later grow into a hunting dog. And they roamed all over Ireland to find this stick. And there are lots of place names in Ireland relating to this story, which was first documented in the 17th century by 2 MacGregor brothers in Glenlyon, funnily enough. So there's no mention whether they found this stick or not, but in their searches, they were ambushed by 2 tribes, the Dogheads and the Catheads, but they defeated them, not by spears or arrows, but by waving their magic flags at the Dogheads and Catheads and destroying them, and presumably decapitating them. So Craignam Bratach celebrates a place where they wave their flags from. Láv Yerrick relates to a specific flag owned by Ronan of Ulster, which presumably was used to wave a flag around. And Dermot had his own flag as well. And remember that Craig Fé Ciawn? Well, that's where the decapitated dog heads and cat heads, presumably they're heads and cats of dogs, were deposited. So there's the bloody story, which probably originated in Ireland, but was told probably by the people at Cuain Larrick and Rui Du on long summer nights, perhaps. I would like to think so. Right, now we are moving to our last story, which concerns, allegedly, of all things, a mermaid, which I find a bit hard to believe, but it also relates to a dog owned by Finn McCool himself called Bran. A mermaid, allegedly, terrorized people in Strathardle and Glenshee. I don't know how a mermaid could terrorize people if she was on land. I can't quite understand that. But anyway, there we have it. The loch is known as Loch Varich, which strictly speaking means Loch of the Mariner, which again doesn't strictly make sense. So a mermaid really should be something like Máchan Namara, Maiden of the Sea. But anyway, there we have it. But if you look up your Gaelic dictionary, it also could mean Loch of the Scurvy grass. And scurvy grass was cultivated because it was rich in vitamin C. But the ordinary scurvy grass is a coastal plant and likes salty places. So what are we talking about here? And then if you dig a bit deeper, you find there is a Highland scurvy grass, which is peculiar to mountains in Angus and Perthshire, notably Ben Lawers. And here we have a picture of scurvy grass growing on Ben Lawers. So I would plump myself for Loch of the Perthshire scurvy grass here, rather than this so-called mermaid who was chased around by Finn McCool's dog Bran and buried at the Grey Cairn, Carn Leah. So there we have it, another mystery. And finally, we have a Croch Eirineach celebrating not an Irishman. There's Erinachs all over the place, and it celebrates a wedder sheep, a castrated sheep, more prosaically. So, thank you very much. I think I'm pretty much near an end, because we're, as you can see from the place name, entering the territory of Scots speakers, as you can see in the knock of Balmyle, the hill of Percy, which is probably Welsh, Fontstone, and so on, Easter Dalnabrec, which is a fusion of Scots and Gaelic, and so on. So we've come to the end of the Highland part of Glenshee, the Glen of the Fairies. Good.
Thank you very much, John. Absolutely brilliant, and really lovely as well to hear quite a few of Lady Evelyn's tales in there. I'm just going to, in the chat, I'm putting a link to the Fèis Gaelic Memoir SoundCloud page, where we have actually got recordings of 3 of the stories that John read out tonight. So please do have a listen if you would be interested. Right, if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A chat at the bottom of the page. We can see that there is chat there already. Aileen, are you going to be able to join? Because there's some questions in Gaelic and I will not be able to pronounce them. Thank you very much. So, Aileen, over to you.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So there's one here. I've noticed Loigiste, which I think means burnt in local hill names. Craig, it's Loisgte.
Yeah,
I'm not actually Loigiste.
Yeah.
And Tor,
Yeah.
Loigiste. Can you say something about how they were called that?
Oh, well, Loigiste is quite common, actually, and I suspect it's just a place that was dried out in summer and went on fire, or maybe was set on fire purposely for, as people do now, to improve the habitat specifically for grouse. That's what I suspect. Or maybe it was a way of getting rid of stubble, as we once did. But Loigiste is common, yeah, and it comes into sort of Scotticized place names, LOSK, quite often as well. Yeah, so that's right. Yeah, burnt mound. Yeah.
And this one, next one, is actually more of a statement than a question. I think Bealach na Sermon, considered to have been renamed after a disruption of the church when the Fee Church had no building and was forced to worship outdoors. Now, is that connected to Moulin?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to look at as I said, the statistical account to find the evidence for that. I find it fascinating. And that's certainly what happened. But I mean, the Free Church people, unlike the Covenanters, weren't ridden down when they were preaching outside. So why would you climb most of the way up Bain of Rachki to hear a sermon? It sounds a lot of trouble to go to. I'd like to go up there and see if there's any evidence for that alternative place name to do with a sour plant like sorrel, and look at the statistical account. But yeah, maybe it is outdoor preaching. Who knows? Who knows?
And there was, please repeat and spell the name of the Black Castle of Moulin.
Castell, that's easy. So D-U-B-H, black. So Verlinia, so it's of Moulin, or Merlin. So Merlin would be Maothlline. So Ligne is just a pool. You get it in Loch Ligne, and Mer is just an adjective meaning soft. Unusual to get an adjective before a noun like that. It could mean it's very soft, and Amy testifies it's very soft.
You definitely need your wellies to walk round there.
Yeah, or it could be an older form of Gaelic, because before, a long time ago, Gaelic did put the adjectives first. But certainly quite an old word.
I need to get up there and check that out as well.
Check it out, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question here about being away with the fairies. Did both men and women experience being away with the fairies? The reason I'm asking, it just sounds like an excuse for having been away too long without telling anyone.
Yeah, so I'm going on sabbatical for a year. Yeah. Yeah, none of Evelyn's stories relate to women being enchanted outside green hillocks at all. It's always men. That's quite odd, isn't it? Quite odd. Ah, wait a minute. And the last one, we heard about the humpbacks who were men, but I don't think they heard music and joined in and then were cursed, or one of them was cursed with a growing hump on his back. But they weren't enchanted. They didn't stop and lose all sense of time. So that's the only one I can think of where a man is involved listening to fairy music. Otherwise, it's young boys or herdsmen. The women were too busy at home sort of cooking for brownies and urusks. It broke in.
The theme of being away for a year or a year and a day seems to come up quite a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Really common.
Yeah. I've got a question myself, actually, John, before I ask the next one. So just thinking about you mentioned a couple of witches there.
Yes.
Particularly witches that owned cattle.
Allegedly. Yeah.
Were these witches or supposed witches people who existed before the witch hunts? Or do you think it was maybe later? I'm just thinking there is the witch map of Scotland that we could check out.
Yes.
Who's on it that was accused of being a witch?
Well, certainly the one who was buried at Torahorst clearly wasn't dealt out the usual fate of being burnt at the stake. So she got away with it. Cailleach Ainavriach, which we did in the last talk, I think she was killed by one of the people whom she was cursing on Ranach Moor, rather than going to the stake. Who was the other one? The other one tonight was, can I remember? Have I forgotten? Oh yes, the one at Clach Nanarach. She escaped as well, although having been hotly pursued by the laird. So they hadn't been executed, any of these.
Yeah.
Formally.
I wondered if they were prior to.
Must have been, yeah.
To that time.
But maybe, I don't know, I mean, maybe Highland people didn't have this ultra sort of Protestant thing against witches. And maybe these predate the Reformation. I don't know.
Could be. It's definitely, I'm going to have a wee look on the map to see who's on it. I don't think there's many for that part. There's more further south, I think round about Dunkeld and south. So here's another question. Is Rui associated with shealing in Perthshire?
Yes, definitely. Not always. You get a mix. I mean, that song, Bohan Ari Brai Ranach, calls it an Ari, and there's an Ari Nankulak on the south shore of Loch Ranach. So it's more typical of eastern Perthshire. So it's more typical of Atholl and Glenshee. And certainly it's a Loch Arnside, and in fact, the other glen Fiunda by Loch Quaich or Cuach, it tends to be Ari as well. So it's more eastern, northeastern Perthshire. And it's synonymous with that, meaning a strip of land or even a wrist. So I think the Ari would be, or the Rui would be on a strip of land as sloping down from a hill, rather like your wrist, if you like, slopes down from your elbow and your shoulder.
Sorry, that's my heating has just come on, if you just heard a noise there. Sitting next to the boiler. So there's a question here. I seem to remember that Kevin Gregg from the Cateran Eco Museum showed a photo of the snake stone near Loch Beanie at a talk to Ailith Literary Society.
Oh, did he? Good. He knows where it is then. He can lead us to it. I've fished Loch Beanie several times and I had a bit of a wonder, but I've not found the stone. But I'd be interested to find it and to see if There is a snake-shaped hole in it. It should be mapped.
Just to say, I've just put the link to the interactive witches map in the chat. It is a resource created by the University of Edinburgh and places residence for accused witches. And if you click on that map, it can take you to some very interesting cases, some very interesting local stories. And you can get lost down a rabbit hole for quite some time. So that just come with that warning.
Or down a snake hole.
And so anyone out there, your last chance to ask any more questions. So don't have any more there.
I have a little wee question. It's not about this one. John, where are we going next?
We'd have to do some serious work on more anglicised, Scotticised Gaelic place names, southeast of the Highland fault line, I guess, because we covered most of Highland Perthshire, actually, except Glenlyon or Glownleovan. That's a significant area we haven't covered, actually.
So we could go back up.
We could. I mean, actually, we haven't gone right away along the shores of Loch Tay because I did a big detour. So we haven't talked about the Lady of Lors, for example, who had the second sight, for example, and her prophecies.
I actually had a question about that. So some people recently may have seen the series that came out on Netflix based on a book called Behind Her Eyes.
Oh. And
Behind Her Eyes, I don't really want to give too much away, but they do refer to an estate in Perthshire. And a scene related to second sight appears within this story. And I'm just wondering whether or not the author might have taken inspiration from both the Lady of Lors and the Rannoch Seer.
Maybe.
But I'm not necessarily asking that question, but it's a kind of the wonder for anyone who's seen it or is going to watch it. Bear that in mind, that it could be influenced by Perthshire stories.
Yes. Well, hindsight's, I suppose, an exact science, but it's surprising how many of her predictions can be interpreted in a modern light. And same with the Braham seer as well, up in Sutherland, I think he was, wasn't he? Again, he predicted the downfall of clan chiefs and the railway, and she predicted steamers on Loch Tay and the clearances of Loch Tay. So yeah, and I think the dying out of the Breadalbane Campbells.
Oh, okay.
But again, I suppose, Gaelic society at the time, coming back to this witchcraft question, I mean, people having second sight was not unusual, but I suppose could be read by Lowlanders as being akin to witchcraft. So perhaps that's maybe an explanation as to why there maybe is not such a history of Highland persecution of witches, because the idea of magic and fairies and second sights sort of built into everybody's belief system and not something necessarily to be seen as evil.
Yeah. There's another question there. Will you be covering the Dunkeld area?
Again, I've missed that out, haven't I? Yes. I want to do that. I want to get, the reason I didn't do it, I thought of doing it on this one, was I want to get some pictures of the inside of the restored hermitage, which was built by the Athol family for the telling of the tales of the Fianna. And it has some beautiful murals of some of the stories, which are illustrated in sort of Art Deco fashion with Gaelic quotes. And I wanted to get those pictures before I can't find them online anywhere. So when I do that, when I'm released, when we're all released, when is it? April? No, that's
26th of April.
26th of April. I shall go. In fact, I'm in Pitlochry in May, so I'll do it then. Yeah, so that's why I've missed it out. But there's a lot around Dunkeld. There's another Clach of Och, for example.
Well, do let us know, and we will keep people posted.
Yeah.
Just to kind of flag up as well, Pitlochry Festival Theatre will be making some announcements in the coming days and week about what's going to be happening with the summer season, and the Fèis Gaelic Memoir will have some events as part of that. So please do look out online. And if it's all right with you, I will send you a kind of little email round just about that, so that you can sign up for those events. So fingers crossed, we will be in person, and maybe doing a bit of a hybrid in person and online thing, because sometimes it's quite nice just to be in your own home and not have to go anywhere. Although I think we've had enough of that, haven't we?
Yeah.
So,
I think we want to get out and walk the landscape now.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Aileen, anything else to say?
Just a plug in the Gaelic Society of Perth are doing a big historical event on Friday night, the first online Ceilidh. So if you take a look on Eventbrite for Gaelic Society of Perth, there are still a few free tickets left for that event. Hopefully the first of many, but we're trialing it and seeing how it's going.
Good.
Right.
And that's all. Yeah, just more and tang, Iain. I guess Amy, thanks very much. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Hi, Bianach Lev Ella, agus tap live son a céisteachrum. Agus I mean dóchas go de chord an áirit acu. Rui fra, got my pronouns mixed up.
Thanks very much, everyone, and good night.
Yeah. Thank you, bye.
Oi, gyfalif. Whew. That was a bit of a gallop.